Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure Podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts, ideas and stories from some incredible guests to hopefully inspire you to live more adventurously in your everyday lives. So today I am super excited to welcome Nick Goldsmith to the show. Nick is a speaker and author, co-founder of Hidden Valley Bushcraft, and also a former Royal Marine Commando who served over 10 years between 2007 and 2018, completing over 6 operational deployments in that time. He now works with governments and charities on programs to help foster a mentally resilient society and is the founder of the Woodland Warrior Programme, which is now in its 7th year and supports the rehabilitation of armed forces and blue light emergency service through the healing power of nature. Nick and I connected. We've been connected for a number of years, but I don't think we've ever actually spoken in person or met in person. So I wasn't going to let this opportunity slip through when he wrote a wonderful book, Rewild Your Mind, which came out earlier this year. And I just finished reading the book and I was like, do you know what? I knew Nick was perfect for this podcast, but I just hadn't quite managed to get the email out. And then when I finished reading it, I was like, I've got to get you on. There is so many different touch points in the book with what we're trying to do with this podcast and connect people with nature and their internal adventure and all of those side of things. So I'm absolutely thrilled that Nick agreed to come on the show and I'm delighted to have him here. So Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so very much for that rather flattering and really rather wonderful intro. I'm lost for words. As someone who's not normally lost for words.
Not a great start to a podcast, can I just say? We'll use that shot of your book cool. As well.
We're warming up. We're warming up.
We'll get there. Brilliant. So I wonder if we could start. I mean, there's so many different places I could start with this because obviously you've just published the book. You've got the programs you've run. You've got Hidden Valley. And I just wondered if you could just sort of take us back to what motivated you, I guess, to found Hidden Valley Bushcraft, but also the golden thread that's sort of woven through all of the work that you're doing around that connection with nature and that sort of, I want to say, grounding, that coming back to a place that feels really simple and natural. And that, like I said, it seems to weave through everything you've done. And I just wondered what that sort of means for you, what motivated you to get started.
That's a brilliant question, and I'm very pleased to be able to answer it as quickly and simply as I can. And you've nailed it already. It's connection. I was so utterly disconnected from, in so many different ways. You know, if you've read the book, you'll understand. But if you haven't read the book, just to contextualize here, so I grew up in East Sussex, playing a lot of rugby, very outdoorsy type. And I think several times throughout our lives, we have to kind of go back to a point of reset and start again and make a new plan and find a new direction. And, you know, if you follow the thinking that we're somebody new every 7 years, essentially, we're a new version of ourselves, that this process tends to organically happen within us, or it's innate, it's a human thing. I found myself falling just short of being able to play to the standard of rugby that I thought that I was going to go on to do. And I was craving high performance teams, and having been part of a rugby club from the age of 5 and played at a fairly decent standard, and I'd captained for county and all that kind of stuff. And I thought, well, you know, natural process, I'll go on to Harlequins rugby and everything will be fine. And I had that process somewhat scuppered, but not in the way you might expect. And I've danced around this over the years, and I'm pretty open about the whole thing. We live in a different world, I will say, to the world I was living in as a sort of 17, 18-year-old. But I came from a state school education, and my parents were pulled into a little room by a select few at that particular rugby club in that particular organisation, and we were told, and there were probably 5 or 6 of us in terms of lads from a state school education in that county squad, And we were told we should be very proud and we should be very fortunate that boys from our schools have been chosen to be part of this organisation and so on and so forth. And very quickly there was a shift from being sort of A-team, 80-minute club to B-team last 5 minutes in the rain. And you could see what was happening there. Now, when we look at professional rugby today, obviously I'm very pleased to hear and see that we see Ellis Genge, and we see some absolute legends who have come from every background under the sun. So a lot of that's been done away with. But as I was coming through, there was a bit of that going on. That then caused me to take a different trajectory, and I found myself looking at a career in the military. So I'd had a knee injury, and the armed forces weren't going to touch me for a while. So I was feeling a little bit glum about that, and I picked up a career as a bricklayer. So I did my construction qualifications, went out on site, did about 5 houses, ran to site and back every single day, at 8 miles each way, with a trowel and my steel toe cap boots in there. So I was already, the mindset was there. I was a very highly driven physical individual, and I needed to make sure the knee was up to scratch. The Royal Marines wouldn't touch me until I turned 19. Started that long, arduous process. Got into recruit training, passed everything, somehow by grace of God, didn't get injured, got through the other end. So from the 67 of us that started, there were 11 of us left, straight into a highly industrious period for the Corps and for the British Armed Forces as a whole. Lots of deployments, lots of opportunity, however you want to look at it, and lots of potential, sadly, for some pretty visceral life experiences to take place. And several occasions, as I've alluded to in the book, I was the right place, wrong time. And I found myself in these situations and things were happening. And it all started to bring about this horrid, disconnected, disillusioned feeling, And so this whole dream of super high performance teams, and even working alongside and with in sort of tier 1 special forces elements, that was still present. And so it got to a point where on tour numbers, at the end of deployment number 6, I'd done 7 months, no R&R. And we'd incurred this roller coaster of about 7 or 8 years where we'd had everything from my mother's cancer, which thankfully, touch wood, she survived, but, invasive for surgery, radio, chemo, the whole shebang. I'd been used in a number of different roles, including some rather unorthodox, interesting work further afield. I had been in the dog's body assisting role, working as a sort of a underling, driving vehicles, chef. I'd done all the logistical supply, running around behind the scenes for people as well. And then I'd done the pointy stuff. So it was a really diverse, eclectic career. But the overriding feeling was disconnection. I was horribly disconnected from the reality, my version of reality going into service, to the version of reality I possessed coming out of service. And so this was really, really tricky. And the only place that made any sense to me, as I hold up a picture of the book here, was back in the outdoors around a campfire and back to that sort of rural start point in the forests of East Sussex. So while I spent nearly 4 years in a naval recovery service centre, I had the opportunity to go back to a time and a place that made sense to me and really knuckle down into a new education, I guess. I undertook qualifications in ethnobotany, the study of trees, plants, flowers, their chemical constituents, a relationship to us as humans throughout the ages, right the way through to the bushcraft leadership and instruction, the teaching side of things, which I loved. I loved learning about Pavlov's dogs and how they salivated when he blew the whistle and doing all the teaching theory. And but what I loved more was getting out there and sharing a childhood, or now a lifetime's worth of experiences. And some of them, not pretty, but they all have tangible takeaways and they all carry weight and they add to a depth of character and where I can go to with my teaching and how I can get that across to the various groups or organizations I'm working with, whether it's as a speaker or stag do bushcraft weekend, things I used to do in the past as I've sort of built as things have moved along, So there's a big long-winded answer, but hopefully that gets us a bit closer.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many points I could pick up. And And I think it's also really helpful to see and to hear that trajectory as well, because I think often, and we had a quick discussion at the start of this, just around often what we see is the end result, the outcome, or the shiny veneer, or what's put out on social media in order to capture attention.
Yeah.
And what we don't always hear is the really difficult stuff that's not only come before that, but that is also part of that makes the holistic picture, I suppose, and really gives it meaning as well in terms of the work that you're doing. Actually, the fact that it's grounded in your own experiences and your own reality makes it, I would imagine, that much more powerful for those people who do then come and take part in the experiences, or like you said, whether it is, you know, coming for a form of rehabilitation, or coming for a stag weekend and actually just getting that time to connect outdoors with friends and that sort of thing. I mean, I often ask people what have been the biggest challenges in terms of the work that they're undertaking or the project that they've undertaken. And I think, you know, you've sort of highlighted the challenges that have got you in a way to the point at which you're working in this space. I'm really interested as well in terms of the challenges that you see, the people that come to you and what they bring into the woodland, into the spaces in which you're working. How, I guess, your own experiences sort of connect and enable you to support those, what other challenges that potentially raises, I suppose, as well. And yeah, just thinking about, you know, when you open I suppose it's that idea, when you open yourself up to something, having been through sorry, it's a very long question, this, but when you open yourself up to things, then also that can present, I guess, challenges that you didn't necessarily see, or it can enable you to support people with their own.
It opens boxes. Yeah. So you're absolutely right. If we work around the three things I see the most, and the reason when I set this up, and believe me, it was born of, I mean, essentially, I had the idea for the Woodland Warrior Programme before I had the idea for Hidden Valley Bushcraft. I don't think many people know that, but that was born of my own journey and what was missing for me from the recovery centre. So they gave me yoga, hydrotherapy, psychology, psychotherapy. They threw everything at me from every angle to try to peel me off the ceiling and get me to sort of rewire this hardcore sympathetic system that I've been kind of molded into to back to a parasympathetic and a much more kind of rest and digest state, and something where I wasn't completely fried all the time, waking up with tinnitus ringing and, you know, all the rest of it. And like I say, it's a hell of a journey. But when you think about these three massive key things, we're talking about injustice, rejection, and grief. If you're listening to this podcast and you're someone who has experienced any one of these or any combination of these, and if you've been really unfortunate, you've had a taste of all three of these recently in one go, it is brutal in the way that the coping mechanisms, unhealthy sometimes, most of the time actually, that we reach for start to manifest, and we start to try to sort of plug things with plasters, and we'll do anything to not have to get to the root cause of what's really going on there. And the single biggest thing I guess I've learned is that environment is key. So if you think back, and I'm just going to touch on those challenges to answer your question a bit further in just a moment. If you think back, I spent an awful lot of my time for those nearly 4 years sat in a 4-squared Napoleonic 4-foot thick building in front of a psychiatrist or psychologist with loops and pips and stripes on their uniform that denoted that they were some sort of mega rank, and yet their ID card said they had 1 million letters after their name. And I just felt this huge power struggle. I felt like, imposter syndrome is something we'll touch on in a minute, but I mean, it was almost like to the point of nihilism. What is the point of me? Like, it was ridiculous. And it was only through my own unnurtured level of emotional intelligence, which I guess has always been there and always been pretty good, growing up with a French mother and having a European open mindset towards things. That kind of probably helped me, speaking fluent languages and things. And so I asked this person, I think I remember the first session really clearly. We sat down and I got the sort of fingers touching each other, the sort of triangular power stance, looking over the glasses at me. And if he's listening to this, he'll know the story well because he was there. And he said, right, update me. Where are we at? And I just then had a go at him and said, look, you sit there with your loops, your pips, your stripes, and yet your ID card said you've got half the alphabet after your name. And said, you come in civvies, as in civilian clothing, or I don't come again. I got up, stormed off, nearly took the door off the handles and walked off down the corridor. That was session 1. Well done. Great. It's a good start. I was just so angry the system had let me down. And we do need to add in that although I'd been identified as desperately needing this to be taken out of that tier 1 unit environment and put into this recovery centre, they'd fumbled it there was an administrative error, which meant I spent 8 months at home alone, getting paid on leave, but I really had reached my lowest point during that time. That was on a flip of a coin that I pretty much called out to the psych nurse, the one person I trusted who'd identified me from the tour as struggling. So it's a bit of it's a real knife edge story to get to where I was. And long story short, that person then turned up in some horrible flowery purple shirt the next week, and it made me smile immediately. It was very disarming. And then we started to give and take and started to make small incremental progress. But the reason I'm highlighting that particular story is that in an instant, it taught me, or it showed me, that environment is key. Now, when I'm sat around a campfire and when I'm working with groups now, I know for the fact that we've got hair under our armpits and we produce oils from the side of our nose, that for 300,000 years we've sat around a campfire in any formation, circular or otherwise, as a tribe or as a group. We've come together, we've cooked together over the campfire, we've shared, and that is so disarming and such the perfect environment for people to deal with these massive injustice, rejection, grief, to even begin to look at it. And if you put them in that environment and you approach it with the correct, right sort of empathy, and realize that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and let them be heard, but let them be felt that they're being heard. And I guess that's when the sweet science kicks in about sort of when to speak and when not to speak, or how much to let that run. Maybe they're just going to get the needle out on the record and just run the whole life story and give you the what I would refer to as the Lebanese unload, the full magazine, and just literally go for it. And in doing so, they're going to fully trigger themselves. So having a few tricks up your sleeve to be able to just gently interject and sort of say, oh, sorry, could you just push that bit of firewood into the fire for me? Sorry, you were saying. So you've kind of got some level of being able to work that tap on and off as they're absolutely divulging their life's troubles. But again, it just feels so natural that there's no barriers. There are a lot less barriers to that feeling of confrontational sharing with a stranger type thing. And again, something that we never speak about, I feel, is the conversation that's had without words, just through a set of eyes, windows to the soul. Someone looking at you across the campfire whilst you're working away or making something, or perhaps you're glancing up, or whatever the body language is that is needed in that moment, the little idiosyncrasies, the little motions that we do, you just naturally pitch and flow off of each other, and then it comes out the way it comes out, and then you have an opportunity then to respond and to work through it, either as a pair, or maybe if that person has been brave enough to speak loudly enough and you're in a group setting, then that's kind of an open subconscious invite to the others to maybe pitch in with their thoughts on the matter. And it just has such a profound effect on the individual in their confidence and competence to be able to then speak up again, maybe at another occasion or in another setting. The way I've often described the Woodland Warrior Programme is it's not about pointing the horse to water. It's about helping the horse realize it's thirsty in the first place. That's what that actually is. And then when it's ready, it will start emailing you from every angle and dropping into DMs from every possible angle, asking where I'm ready now. I'm ready to make a change. Where can I go do this? And then that's when that signposting is paramount. And you need to have the right service lined up for that individual to then carry on down a sort of a very professionalized, more clinical route, perhaps. But that doesn't stop their journey with us. The whole idea of this thing is to act as a handrail that they can continually come and keep popping back in and meeting others who've been through the same process in a sort of peer-to-peer, non-clinical environment. And it just works. It just works really, really well. So the biggest challenge for me was imposter syndrome. I had to get over the idea that just because I am not a clinical psychologist or psychiatrist, just because I have not done a classical degree in said subjects, does not mean necessarily that I am not the right person to be speaking to around a campfire. Because I've spoken to those people a lot, and I've been through sort of pretty much every variation of unhealthy behavior that I think I'm going to do now. I'm cool with that. And I've had to look at my horrible vulnerabilities and shortcomings, and they are horrible because they're human. And when people often say, oh, the good, the bad, and the ugly, I have to correct them now and say, look, it's the good, the bad, and the human. The human part of you needs something or wants something, and that chimp will go find a banana unless you find a way to sensibly put something into play. Okay, so the chimp gets its banana, and the conscious 3% of you I'm talking to right now goes about its business, and life is good. And there you are managing yourself. That is management. Because if you do not, that chimp subconsciously offline will go find its banana, and whatever that looks like. So whether that looks like drinking or drugs, if we're trying to forget something, whether it looks like changing our appearance every 2 minutes, tattoos, piercings, changing hair color, but on a constant basis because we don't like the person we see in the mirror. Perhaps we feel that we're a victim, or maybe we are going to take part in some high risk behavior. So we're going to have extramarital affairs. We're going to be fighting. We're going to be driving a motorbike like we stole it. We're going to be doing anything to give us that buzz, the adrenaline rush that puts us back on the edge. And typically we see a lot of that with young infanteers who have had those highly kinetic tours, have felt that euphoric buzz, that dopamine system, everything's been jacked, and are craving that once more. So just short of skydiving, I don't think there's much that sort of touches the euphoria that comes, the mixed euphoria that comes with sort of kinetic combat type stuff. But then there's also huge lows that no one talks about because it's yin and yang, and your seesaw is so sensitive. Whatever goes up will come down. And so if you go chasing those highs, there is inevitable lows that comes with it. And the higher the highs, the lower the lows. And it's almost as though if you are a person who has had a traumatic experience or who has been through something incredibly painful or difficult or exhilarating even, that your experiential range has been stretched above and below. So yes, you can go and have these incredible high highs, and you don't necessarily need alcohol to do that, but you can also then experience those incredibly low lows, which are almost dangerous at times. So it's how do you learn to not just educate yourself around it, but see the warning signs before that behavior begins. Because remember, it's subconscious. Most of it is subconscious. So how do we get there? How does that take place? Where does that happen? And for me, again, the best place to do the yards and to learn about yourself and to a degree reprogram yourself is in the outdoors. And that's pretty much what book number 2 is going to be a lot about, is about much more of the why. Why does the outdoors create, from the neurology side of things, how does it help to rewire the accountability side of us? I mean, I could use the classic, you're in a canoe, you fall out the canoe, you've got to do something about it. You lose heat 25 times faster once you're completely wet. You're going to die. You better do something about it. Well, let's try another one. You're out for a morning walk and you tread in dog muck. Nothing will create a call to action to your brain, a physical call to action, faster than, oh God, I've just trod in dog muck. You will run 50 yards to the nearest grass verge to wipe your foot on the grass verge. You'll probably head home at the end of it via every puddle on the way, and you will forensically clean that boot. There's not a chance in hell you're just going to leave that boot and then find it again another day. You will forensically clean it. So what you've actually done there is you've created a call to action charged with emotion in a timely fashion in a short amount of time, and something needed to happen and you did it. So quite quickly, you go from becoming a person who is, that's not my problem to deal with, to having prolonged experiences in the outdoors and spending more and more time, becoming more and more comfortable with the weather and all the other things the variables that get thrown at you on any given day here in the Great Britain particularly. You become somebody who is very, let's transpire that into the workplace. The digital, like, photocopy is broken, whatever. And straight away you're like, oh God. So what's the number on the side of it? Call the engineer. Right, engineer's coming out tomorrow. Brilliant. Email boss. Photocopy number 3 is broken. I've called the engineer, just so you know. It's done. Boom. You go from being that person that gets to the photocopy and then goes, oh God, just go find another photocopier, not my problem, to someone who calls the engineer. And that's how you get there. It's through that behavioral change, becoming a can-do person. So there's many, many outcomes. I've gone off on an amazing tangent.
It is an amazing tangent, though. I'm firing in so many different ways, just thinking, okay, I want to pick up on that bit. I'm still stuck with the dog poo, if I'm perfectly honest, and reliving some particularly traumatic experiences around that. But I wanted to just sort of go back to this point you make about, I think there were 2 sort of related points I thought were just fascinating. The first one was around your point about the horse and about the horse knowing it's thirsty. Because I think particularly so much of the narrative around mental health, which is really positive in the sense that it's at least starting the conversation and getting it out there. And, a lot of the campaigns around mental health, right? It's okay not to be okay and all this. But if you don't know you're not okay, if you don't know you're in that place, then that whole premise becomes so much more challenging.
Doesn't it?
And I think then it was just linked to that point you made. I think it's particularly interesting when you talk about, I think, adventure in a sort of in its wider sense, that actually we focus a lot when we talk about mental health on the lows. Okay, looking for, actually when you're depressed or you're not able to function, but actually one of the key symptoms, like you said, is that sort of manic high behavior and seeking constant adrenaline, seeking constant, because it's an avoidance, like you said, it's just another drug in a way that we head to adrenaline. We look for the thing that's going to lift us out of it. We look for the excitement and the escape from our ordinary lives. And I just think that's such a powerful point, particularly when we're speaking, obviously the life experiences that you've had, which, for the majority of people haven't necessarily, but then so many people, I think, can relate to this idea of actually we're fed a constant diet of, life needs to be extra. Life needs to be more than, we should be doing all these huge things all of the time. And that gives our life meaning. And again, we touched on it just before we started this podcast, that this idea of coming back to a really simple place and recognizing, and can we sit with that, with recognizing our need for simplicity, for routine, for structure, for a place that isn't demanding so much of us, and does that allow us to recalibrate in a way? And I'd love you just to expand a little bit more on this idea of simplicity and what that means for you.
Well, I think it's well documented that less is more. And as somebody who does a fair amount of talking, actually some of the most powerful messages are those short, stoic, almost fables or storytelling. And it's a great technique I use to get through to someone around the campfire, because we know the way the brain is wired up. And again, going back to that time-tested 300,000 year model, which is what essentially we are. Our eyes have not developed for past the last 20,000 years to take in anything more than daylight and fire. And suddenly we're getting smashed with blue light long past our circadian rhythm, where it's time to go to bed. And of course, that's then having knock-on effects on all the other body systems. So if you treat the body as a organism, and it's an animal, we're as much as we are technologically advanced for our incredible opposable thumbs, we're also rather poorly designed, because we've got quite a rubbish field of periphery vision as one singular individual outdoors. But the reason we've done so well is through connection and tribe and doing things as a group. And if you look at the way we live our lives now, we are more sedentary than we ever have been. And people say, yeah, but I spoke to 16 different people today. And I'm like, yeah, down a phone or via Zoom. Or, I mean, there's a thing called Zoom neck. Is that a thing now that came out through where people are like,
I think so, yeah.
Like, what's up with you? I'm off to see the osteopath. What's wrong? I've got Zoom neck. Zoom neck. Jesus. I mean, it's so you don't get that around the campfire, right? What you do get is burnt fingertips from picking up the wrong bit of firewood or something like that, or a little bit of nice healthy smoke inhalation, or a red eye where the smoke was following you around the campfire. But it's different problems. It's simplicity. It is in its absolute simplicity. If you strip it all back, what do we basically need to do to survive every day? We need to find water, make some food safe to consume, and be on the lookout for potential predators and or prey species. We need to ideally be looking after and educating those who are going to come after us. We need to be all these kind of very, very primal functions. And actually, when you think about it, in our quest, which is a very human quest to simplify everything. So to take the path of least resistance is to be human. And why would you not look at everything in the animal kingdom, the way things have evolved? Everything has evolved to work and operate in a state where it can survive the harshness of the outdoors. We've kind of taken that to another level now, where I don't have to leave my house if I really don't want to. I can just order the food to arrive. Everything will just arrive at my doorstep from my phone. I can just control my whole life. I mean, what do I want to go outdoors for? It's nasty, wet and cold, and why would I want to do that? Potentially I could die. And of course, that mindset has created hot water, click of a finger, lighting, click of a finger, everything you can imagine. You can just click your fingers and it can be done now. And yet, if you look at the rate of anxiety, depression, the number of allergies, the amount of different food intolerances, like the things that are going on, which are right in front of us, I can't help but think, just chucking it out there as somebody with no letters after his name, that the two are connected intrinsically. There has to be a reason I'm not particularly special. I'm not particularly any different to any other human being, other than the fact that I spend almost every day of my life, majority of that day, outdoors. Why am I rarely ever ill? Why did this terrible pandemic, which struck the planet, not touch the sides of me? Even though I was face to face with key workers, working double overtime the whole through that process to try and give some respite to our country's kind of lifeline, whether it was teachers, whether it was care home workers, whether it's police, ambulance, fire service, whoever it was, acute respiratory ward nurses. I was in front of them around the campfire. We were making spoons. We were doing all sorts the whole way through that time period and building an off-grid cabin. And I was not ill. Nothing kind of happened. And I can't help but think to myself, and also given the sort of mental health turnaround that I've experienced from the very dark, scarily dark place that I was in to where I am now, and I'm not addicted to drugs ending in "-ine" or "am". I don't have any of them in my possession, and I don't take any of those either. So, what's the one common denominator here? And it's that I'm spending ridiculous amounts of time in the outdoors, interacting with the outdoors, and I'm shoveling manure, and I'm in contact with bacterial organisms all day, every day. And yet, when I go to what was Bristol Zoo, Wild Place Project, which, by the way, is an incredible place that my little son, who's 4 years old, who's basically a walking Petri dish on legs, comes home, coughs in the face, and suddenly I'm ill. I'm like, what? No way. But then that makes sense, because there's 50,000 other people visiting that place from schools all over the place, from the capital, everywhere, on any given day. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. But you can kind of see where I'm going with this. I'm just gently alluding to some facts, but I'm not pointing any hardcore fingers, and I'm not going to start Harvard referencing studies or anything like that. I don't think it needs to be done. I'm just telling it how I see it, I guess, from the point of view of someone who is fortunate enough to speak to people from ministerial level all the way down to kindergarten children around a campfire daily, 365 days of the year, and I can see the crossovers in the behaviors, and I can see the crossovers in the outcomes. So in terms of a what would you call it? I really don't enjoy this word, ecotherapy. It's not I'm not a big fan of I wouldn't class myself as a therapist. I'm an outdoorsman, but I would definitely say from the point of perhaps an educator or from the peer standpoint, let's clear about this from the non-clinical peer standpoint, taking those observations, being not just emotionally intelligent, but emotionally articulate enough to be able to convey that message and dress it up 16 different ways through storytelling and things like that, gets it through to people in a way that you can easily breach what would have taken 5-6 sessions of the counsellor to make a safe space, and all the rest of it can be done in a very short space of time. So that trust, that all-encompassing trust, that bond starts to begin very early. And I guess that's part of the power of what we're doing, is that the environment is key. Environment is, if you use the analogy, you don't put a poorly fish in dirty water. That's a classic sort of semi-stoic saying, but yeah, that works well for me to try and explain what it is I'm doing, essentially getting people putting back into the environment from whence we came, and look what happens. Things start to unpack and unfold, and we can work through it.
Yeah, and I think, and it makes me think of, the word you used right at the start around connection, and that point about reconnecting, that actually about that sometimes it can be about what we don't notice, like you said, we don't notice we need, but also that we've somehow lost ourselves as being part of the natural world, that it's become the reasons we are doing things is because of our, like as you said, because we're craving simplicity. That's part of our DNA, that that we need these simplifications to function, but that somewhere along the way, that bit that connects us back with our natural selves and what we know to work for us as well, through a lived experiential way, as well as, and thankfully now there are huge amounts of studies that are coming out that are really supporting the work that you do, and that, spending time in nature, which is fantastic. But it's also, like you said, giving weight to those experiential moments, and from that knowledge accrued over time, and of speaking to people, and of how we find our ways not only to connect with others, but with ourselves as well, and placing ourselves back in the natural world. I think so fascinating. You mentioned earlier about your second book, which is really exciting by the sounds of it. So I was just wondering, you don't need to talk about that, by the way, if you don't want to, because my next question was going to be about what's coming next. And I just wondered what, having written this first book, or having written Rewild Your Mind, and with all the work you're doing, I mean, where would you like to see this go? I guess both in terms of your own work, but in terms of, I guess changes from a societal level, or in terms of the way in which we live our lives. I mean, what's the next steps?
I think you're absolutely right. Yeah, on a cultural level, and across the board. So I am getting out there, and rather terrifying to begin with, but it's making more and more sense. I'm speaking to everyone from big, scarily big tech companies who are bringing me in to deliver talks at their kind of big annual get-togethers and team building events and things like that, right the way through to working with British Armed Forces, still serving today, doing sort of personnel development days. So I recently had Commando Helicopter Force come down. So everyone from the sort of techie engineering, geeky types that actually maintain the airframe and make the thing go, all the way through to the hierarchy, the leadership inside of there, because I think this is where at every level of society we need to be getting on board with the idea that we live in a world where it's not good enough to be just emotionally intelligent anymore. We throw this word around. I see it on LinkedIn every 2 minutes. Someone's like emotional intelligence. We need to be emotionally articulate. We need to be able to get the message across in a way that sticks and that shows people that they are supported from the top down, and that people from the bottom up, completely believe in the mission of the overarching organization, and what it is they're doing. And if you can achieve that from a leadership perspective, you are really going to get into a place where you're going to see a lot less days where people are having a sick day, and you're going to see a lot more productivity in the workplace, and people are going to want to be there. So it's people, passion, purpose, communication, and connection. It's about bringing that piece together. And how do you get people to go from being just colleagues in the workplace to being a genuine community that cares and that wants to be there, driving whatever it is that they do for a living onwards, whether they're a small part of that, which then makes the rest of it go, but it's empowerment of the whole system. And it doesn't just happen at the click of a finger, and it doesn't happen by having a blinking pre-meeting to then have a meeting, to then have a meeting after the meeting, so that we're all aware of what just was said in the meeting. Now, I live in a house with somebody who is in that world right now, who worked for a massive organisation, and she's in a managerial role. And right now, she's downstairs having a meeting about a meeting. And I always walk past and sort of make a sly remark about, "Are you having a meeting about a meeting?" And she's like, "Oh, just go outside." And but it's true, because to me, it's like, my God, if we just met at eye level, eye to eye, we had this conversation, and then this took place or whatever, we're all clear. So we're all clear. We're using language. And I think that's the key element here, is that we're using, because there is like workplace language. And then there's the language we know to be the one we speak in, to the English language, let's say you and I are talking in now. But then there's like another language where it's like, are you so utterly clear on a bomb-proof level what we've just said, that you're happy, that I'm happy, that they're happy, that we're all happy, that this is the case? Yeah, great. So we don't need to jump on a meeting for another hour after this to then talk about everything we just talked about. It drives me potty to watch, because it's like a communication, not a breakdown, but it just seems so overly complicated for something that doesn't need to be. And if you've seen anyone coming out of the armed forces, you'll always see them manking and moaning about how there's this difference in the systems. But you also have to remember, and maybe it's sometimes my job to remind hierarchy in the armed forces as well now, because I'm not in, right? So I can pretty much say this with confidence. I've seen lots of different models of leadership, and lots of different elite, everything from elite sport teams and sportsmen right the way through to obviously having served in and around that world, that sort of tier one world, and seen how those guys operate is fascinating. But when you see everything starts culturally and everything starts at a society level, as you so rightly said, and it often starts in childhood, and I haven't got a magic wand and I can't go back in time and make people change the way they grew up. But what we can do is we can learn, and we can accept that there are certain ways of doing things which produce a result of X, Y, or Z. Now, what I'm actually getting into and touching on now is a little bit of a subject which I've found it very hard to understand to start with, but now it's helped me to tie together parts of my story, which I alluded to right at the start of this with my rugby journey. I have seen people who have gone through 1,000 years worth of warfare system, which is the armed forces system, a way of doing things. Okay, so they've come out as a colonel, lieutenant colonel, whatever, and they've gone into the world of civvy street, and they feel like they're treading on metaphorical rakes as they're going from job to job. They might do 3 jobs instead of 18 months because nothing feels right, and I didn't like the way those guys worked. And actually what it is your system that's designed to keep people alive and is very streamlined for 1,000 years worth of warfare isn't necessarily the same system that JP Morgan or someone like that's going to use when you get out into the big bad world and someone says, here's 10 million, I want to see a 4% return on this over so-and-so. And they're suddenly going, I haven't got a file for that. But the CV said, I was in charge of 900 people, massive budgets, I've been a really important person, I can do all this kind of stuff, I'm really resourceful, And suddenly behind closed doors, this person is crumbling. And actually, when you get into it, and you really get into it around the campfire, we end up unraveling a story that goes beyond service, and it goes right the way back to a 6 to 10-year-old boy who gets dropped off in a dorm full of other 6 to 10-year-old boys who approach him and say, why didn't your dad want you then? And we go through this whole massive unpacking of a journey of an education which is born with massive responsibility and has created a product which at every level from a very young age has had huge expectations placed upon it, huge expectations. And father was in the military, so you'll be in the military, and then you'll do this. And I work with these people around the campfire, and I see these people who go on to become our elites, our leaders, our politicians, at every level. And it made me realize, gosh, they're human too. And if you can apply the empathy there and you can really start to see past all that stuff, it doesn't matter whether you went to state school, and it doesn't matter who went to private school. In fact, none of it matters at all. What matters is that there is an opportunity for us to learn from one another, to move forward with genuine empathy and have a real conversation. But the difficulty comes with, as you said, when that person can't see the way they are for the same way a fish doesn't see the water it's in, we then find ourselves in a sticky position, because you feel like you're banging your head against a brick wall working with these people, and you're like, God, why do you not get this? And it's almost too confrontational, certainly in the workspace, to be like, look, can I just bring this up and just go straight for the jugular and be like, you're being a bit of a plum. And the reason you're being a plum is because you've always been a plum, and it's because of this. And then backs go up and people are getting fired, or thumped or whatever's happening, and it's not good. But if you have that conversation with that difficult individual around a campfire, it's so disarming. And I often say in my talks, I'll often do the audience participation thing and go, right, put your hand up if you've got a difficult family member. Every single hand should be up in the room, stadium, audience, wherever it is I'm talking. Because we've all got a family member that's difficult. That's why you choose your friends, not your family. Another very stoic classic saying. You choose your friends, not your family. And so how do we have a conversation with that difficult family member? Well, you invite them over for a barbecue in the outdoors. And you have a heat source and some sort of semi-controllable heat source, a gas burner, barbecue, 10-pound disposable barbecue, I don't care what. And you cook some food together. And then you have that conversation and you watch the confrontational difficulties melt away as they start to meet you on a level, because you're hacking into that original kind of old factory setting of two people in the outdoors sat around a campfire of sorts. And that's how you have difficult conversations with people. But for me, it's common sense and it's fantastic. And you can have a real conversation and meet someone on a real level, and you can show some vulnerability and they can show some vulnerability, and you can actually get somewhere with them. But trying to do it over Zoom and having 3 meetings about meetings is redonkulous. Does that make any sense to you?
It makes sense. I was just thinking how wonderful it would be if we could replace Zoom meetings with campfire meetings, and maybe how much more productive, if that's where we're trying to get to, things might be. And I think it's really interesting just thinking about that point about productivity as well, and how, like you say, when you remove that human element, the element of connection, then also productivity becomes about a data set or about a percentage. But actually, when you look at the human cost to that, and therefore actually what the real cost is, because it has a monetary cost too, then actually it's all connected. But
data is everything in this day and age. Data is the new currency. Data is people are arguing now whether the most expensive thing that anyone could spend is their time and or give their data.
Yeah. Completely.
Self.
And I was just wanting to touch that point you made about that vulnerability as well, and about often, and usually it can be people who are the most offended, like you said, that in order to change or to reconnect, you need to be vulnerable. Actually, how difficult that is when your defenses have been in place for such a young age for very good reason, because it's protective in the end. But then actually that protective, it's almost like I was thinking in that parallels with the immune system as well, that how the immune system's designed to protect us and to fight off, and it becomes your defense. But actually, some of the most awful diseases when the immune system turns on ourselves or turns inwards and we start fighting ourselves. And I think, that interesting thing around vulnerability and that same and defense mechanisms, how works as well. I could explore this for hours. I'm really conscious that you probably have other things to get to. But I was just wondering if you had, thinking back to the conversation we just had, but also in terms of your experience that you've had with so many different people over a number of years now, and if somebody's listening to this and they think, either I want to start sort of living adventurously in terms of a physical idea, or I want to reconnect with nature and find a way to get back out there, or I feel I need, in order for me to move forward, to start living more adventurously in an emotional type of way and in an emotional sense. What would be the one piece of advice that you would give them?
So to recalibrate, essentially, it would be something I do every day. Wake up and literally shoes going on, clothes going on, and I'm heading straight out the door, regardless of the weather. Even if there is just a little Eskimo sort of facial, it's just my face poking out of a massive jacket, and I'm going to walk 15 to 45 minutes every single day. I've tried ice baths and I just couldn't stick to ice baths 365. I still do cold showers, but I cannot fully commit to any. The only thing I've managed to fully commit to every single morning, where I don't have to share the world with other people, as another brilliant sideline, is walking for 15 to 45 minutes. And it just helps my brain to come online, to feel that daylight on my face, to get everything up and firing as it would do. Because think about it, you'd leave the cave, you'd wake up in the morning, you've either got to go find some food, find some water, make sure that no predators have left any footprint near your camp, and or has any prey been anywhere past any of the traps, or left any sign that it's in the area that you can then capitalize on to better your situation. This is a very natural thing to go on a little daily. If we were in the armed forces, we would call it a clearance patrol, just to have a good look around the area that we live in. And the mindfulness, the green space, it doesn't have to be green. You could be living in a really urban area, but the point is you can feel the wind on your face, you can feel the rain, you can splash in a puddle, the things we hear, smell, sound, see, taste. We're out of that sterile environment of those 4 square walls. And the first thing we tend to put ourselves is some sort of stimulant like caffeine, which obviously just hammers your adrenal glands again. So I won't have coffee until I've done that first walk. That's just one very basic thing, one small change. I'm not going to give you a whole list of things. One small change I do that I've made that has made a humongous difference to my resilience to SAD, feeling very sad in the winter months. And even as someone who works all the way through the winter, I have found myself getting very low, particularly in February. February sucks.
February's rubbish. I'm with you on that. Sorry, people with birthdays in February, but February's rubbish.
It's awful. And so with that comes resilience that you build over time. And it gives a period of reflection every single morning of like a computer needs to defrag all the conversations and potential things that I'm worried about in the day. And I can formulate a plan of how I'm going to hit today and how I'm going to be productive and how I'm going to do this stuff. And it comes in very handy because quite often like this conversation we've just had today will be like bopping around my head next along, and I'll sleep tonight, I'll sleep on it, and then tomorrow morning's walk, I'll think back to things I think I said in this conversation, and I was like, oh God, was that the right thing to say, and should I have it? And I'm breaking that down still. Yeah. But it's giving me a chance to do that, because what we need to be very careful of as well is when people say trust your instincts, trust your gut, trust your instinct on something, it's all very well and good, but if we've incurred trauma, grief, rejection, or what else did I say? Grief, rejection, or injustice. Quite often, you can get a certain level of judgmental bias, which impairs or makes you second guess your own instincts around something. And that then causes problems. But having that time to yourself in the morning to go into the day, absolutely set with you lay out your intention of what it is you're going to do that day and how you're going to do it. And you roll with the punches. We're adaptable creatures. But the point is, it gives you that extra layer, rather than feeling like you woke up in the morning, the alarm went off, it's an assault on the senses, the artificial light went on, you smashed yourself with caffeine, you watch the news, you listen to how a busload of kids went off a mountainside in Chile, everyone's dying, politicians have lied to you, war, death, genocide, everything's terrible. And then you carry all that stress with you through the morning drive to work. Oh, do you see what I'm saying? Like you have a choice in how you wish to wake up at least. And you set your own time for waking up in the morning. So from going from someone who maybe isn't a morning person to someone who really looks forward to their walk in the morning, you can make a big difference to yourself. And it's small, consistent changes that make the biggest overall impact. And I would say, getting up and walking every single morning has had a huge tangible effect over time on me. And it's something I'm going to continue to do. Absolutely.
Amazing. I love it. And I love the achievability of it, just in terms of getting outside and like you said, picking one thing. I think there is so much magic in literally just going, right, find the one thing that works for you, and not that everybody's told you is the thing that you should do, but this is the thing that works for me, and this is the thing I'm going to practice consistently. And I start to notice when I'm not doing it, because then I notice a difference. And so I'm going to show up for it again. And going back to your point earlier around simplicity, I think it's perfect note to finish on, really. Pick one thing that's simple and that works, and that works, and go with that. Nick, that's been absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. I could continue this conversation for a good couple of hours yet, but conscious it's now lunchtime. So I was just wondering if people want to find your book, want to find out more about you, want to find out about your speaking, about Hidden Valley, where can they go?
nickgoldsmith.co.uk, or you can go to hiddenvalleybushcraft.co.uk, or to see the work of the Woodland Warrior Programme, it's woodlandwarriorprogramme.org. I'm on all of the social media channels, including the new Threads, but only as Hidden Valley on that one. Most of them either have a Nick Goldsmith account and or Hidden Valley Bushcraft account running alongside each other. And I look forward to meeting people who have heard this podcast and talking to you again at some point, please.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick. That's been absolutely incredible. Obviously, we'll pop all of those links in the show notes as well, so people can go and find you and connect with you. But I can't thank you enough. That was a really fascinating conversation. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day. Take care. Bye. So an enormous thank you to Nick for coming on the show and for sharing his thoughts and wisdom so generously. I also have a huge apology to make, because when I originally recorded the podcast, it was back in July of this year, and I had all of the best intentions to get it out within a couple of weeks, and I think I even told Nick that. Unfortunately, I then entered the twilight zone that's also known as the school holidays, and I've only just emerged from that slightly odd space and catching back up with things. So there's been quite a gap between my intentions as getting this out and what's actually happened in terms of life. But in some ways, I'm actually quite glad, because what it has given me is a bit of time and space to reflect on our conversation, to go back over it and to think about it. And I was listening again the other day as I was editing, and I just wanted to go back to the comment that Nick made about it's not even about taking a horse to water, it's by helping it to know that it's thirsty. And it really resonated with a conversation I was having earlier today with a colleague around how do we know when we're struggling? And it's not even the step of saying, I need some support, but even to know that we are struggling and that we might require something to support or to help us. And to admit that to ourselves can be really hard, because not only is there the layer of there's something wrong with me for feeling this, or I'm feeling really alone in being I feel like I'm the only one who thinks like this or is feeling this. But then there is also the added layer of I should be able to cope. I should be able to manage. And maybe this is normal. Maybe this is how I should be feeling. So to actually get to the point at which we go,
you know, I'm really struggling, and I think I could do with some help. And being able to admit to that can be quite a long, drawn out, and is far more complicated when we then add in layers of our own expectations of ourselves, of ego, of feeling that we are letting those around us down by admitting. Anyway, it maybe then reflects on Nick's point about the power of the group, and how so often we see mental health and mental well-being as individual pursuits. They are, and I know those of your regular listeners will have heard me talk about this before, but this idea that we're somehow disconnected from the rest of our community or society, and that it is just something that we as individuals struggle with. Whereas we know from research that actually those who struggle with mental health but are embedded in strong communities actually recover more quickly, and tend to not have repeat episodes or repeat challenges. And we know that loneliness is one of the biggest predictors of mental health, of poor mental health outcomes. So when we think about our well-being as fundamentally linked to our connection, which is so much what this podcast is about, it's then so interesting to see the links that, you know, when Nick talks about sitting around the campfire, or the activities we do with part of a group, or, you know, when we're in the workplace, how a resilient work team can support those individuals who might be struggling too. And so I think it sometimes can be helpful to shift the lens of resilience away from this idea of we're always trying to cultivate individual resilience, and towards this idea that resilience can be cultivated as part of a group, and that is its natural home as well. Anyway, I'd love to know what you think, as always. One final point just to mention about the sound quality on this episode. Apologies if you've been affected in any way by not the usual standard of sound quality, because I am currently sat in a hotel room and I have recorded this summary on my phone, so it may sound slightly different, but I thought the most important thing was to share this wonderful episode with you and to get it out there into the world. So thank you for your patience. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Please do let me know what you think. You can contact me on Instagram, Resilience at Work, or Everyday Adventure Pod. You can find me on LinkedIn, Nikki Bass, or you can get in touch via my website, resilienceworks.co.uk. Anyway, we have one more episode to go for season 6 of the Everyday Adventure podcast, and it is going to be an awesome one. I have such a lovely guest to share with you, and I'm super excited about this one. So yeah, please stay tuned. I promise I won't take so long with this next episode. It'll be dropping very soon. So keep your ears peeled, if that's the saying, and I will speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye.